Welcome to the wonderful world of books, one of seven worlds in Seven World Productions, a subsidiary of Angelgram Music. My name is Gino, and I am the sole owner of Angelgram Music and executive director of Seven World Productions. Continuing our series in the In Search of Beauty book, here is Chapter 10, Anita. Hope you enjoy. Go and be inspired. Previously on In Search of Beauty. Mr. Meeker called me over to the table where he and the others were sitting. He asked me who I was studying conducting with in school. I told him Maynard G. Klein at the School of Music at the University of Michigan. He made a note on his card and then looked at me over his half glasses and said, "A very good audition." We shook hands, and then I left thinking I probably will not hear from them. The very next morning, Mr. Meeker's associate Mac Martin called and offered me a position as the piano player in the pit orchestra of their ballroom show at Cedar Point. The position would pay $90 a week plus room and board for 12 weeks of work from Memorial Day through Labor Day. I took the offer, and I had Sharon, the nurse, to thank for engraving into my memory a place that would later become like a second home to me. Chapter 10, Anita. 6 weeks after that audition, on May 20th, 1969, I was packing my Opel station wagon with clothes for 3 months, some books to read, and a stereo record player with my favorite LPs, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, some classical and some big band. I drove from Ann Arbor to Sandusky and Cedar Point on the peninsula into Lake Erie. The room at the Cedars Hotel inside the park was a dorm-style small room with one window, one table, 2 chairs, and a bunk bed. Someone had already taken the lower bunk, so I had to take the upper one. After I moved in, I went to the Golden Palace Theater in Frontiertown, which had just opened. They already had a show up and running for the Memorial Day weekend, while the show I was to play for would start rehearsals the next day and open on the 5th of June. I took the train from the Midway to Frontiertown. I got off the train and found the theater with a sign outside posting the show times. The Riverboat show was 20 minutes long and was repeated 6 times on the hour during the day. They were in between shows as I entered the theater backstage. The show had a piano player, 2 male singers, 2 female singers, and 1 stage manager. I introduced myself and told them I was the piano player for the ballroom show. In our conversations, we discovered that one of the male singers was my roommate. His name was Ron Gentry. I stayed to watch a show and was very impressed at the professionalism by all. I felt like I reached the big time here. Everyone in the show was very talented. The guys sang Golden Days from Student Prince, with my roommate singing tenor. Steve Wright was the other male, and he sang bass. Jim Gertner was the piano player. That first summer was very memorable. I felt like I was part of a family. Mr. Meeker reminded me very much of my father and quickly became my mentor. During rehearsals for our ballroom show called Have a Little Faith and Love, I watched Bob Westbrook, the musical director for all of the shows, work with Mr. Meeker as they wrote the shows at the piano. With us together in the office of the live show department was the arranger who had arranged music for the U.S. Marine Band. He asked me if I knew how to write music, and I said I had studied with Ross Lee Finney at the University of Michigan. He said he needed someone to help copy out the orchestra parts. Mr. Meeker and Bob would work out the arrangement at the piano, give it to the arranger who would score the show for the orchestra, and I would copy all the parts for the various different instruments. We had a piano part, a bass part, a drum part, 2 violins, a harp, 2 trumpets, and a trombone. A nice little 9-piece orchestra. We had the show written and ready for rehearsal in 3 days. We rehearsed a 90-minute show for 4 days, and then we performed it 4 times during the day and one night performance with 1 day and night off. My roommate, Ron, loved tenor singers. He was studying voice at Memphis State. He had brought all his albums but did not have a stereo to play them. So naturally I let him use mine on the condition that he had to listen to Blood, Sweat, and Tears. He introduced me to a tenor by the name of John Gary. He played all his albums and raved about what a fantastic voice this young man had. I was not impressed as much as he was. I thought John was a fine singer, but he was not necessarily a favorite of mine. Ron wanted to go see John at an upcoming tour stop of Student Prince at the Kenley Players Summer Musical Tent in Cleveland, Ohio. Since Ron was singing one of the songs from Student Prince at the Golden Palace, he wanted to get some pointers on how to better his rendition by hearing how John sang the song. Bob Westbrook, the music director, was also from Memphis, where he worked at Pepper Studios during the winter months, writing radio spots and jingles. Both of these guys wanted me to go see and hear John perform. I reluctantly agreed to spend my one night off going with them to Cleveland to hear a real professional sing Golden Days. I must admit that after sitting through 2 hours of this musical, I was entertained and was glad I went. John sang beautifully. Afterwards, we went backstage to visit John and get his autograph. We introduced ourselves as fellow performers at Cedar Point. Ron told him about singing Golden Days at the Palace. I remember shaking hands with John and meeting a beautiful young lady named Lee, who was hanging on to him with both arms. On the way back to the Point, we talked about John at length, and how he made a name for himself as Danny Kaye's summer replacement show on CBS. Ron said maybe someday Bob or I would be his music director. Bob said no way for him. He had a hard enough time working for Mr. Meeker. Apparently he and Mr. Meeker locked horns a few times and had disagreements about writing shows. He said he would probably not get along with John. Bob liked working at Pepper Studios, where they wrote station IDs and jingles. He liked doing that more than working with stars. When Ron asked me if I would ever consider working for John as his music director and conductor, I said, I don't know. At the time, I wasn't sure I was schooled enough in popular music. Until then, my soul training had been classical. I put it out of my mind until a fateful meeting 15 years later, but that's another chapter. Many things changed at the end of the summer season at Cedar Point. In May of 1970, the ballroom was closed down, and we moved the big show to the Centennial Theater, formerly the old Wax Museum in the park. The Centennial Theater had 3 stages, with the orchestra in one stage and the performers using the center and opposite stage from the orchestra. Bob Westbrook, as music director for the live shows, headlined America Sings in the Centennial, and I was the piano player for the alternate review in the same theater. Jim Riggs was the stage manager. Ray Boston was a magician in our show. Other members of our cast were the Wu Brothers from Memphis State, who sang and danced, and Bonnie Piedmont from Monroe, Michigan, who was a tap dancer. Mac Martin, who had been the manager of the live show department in my first year at Cedar Point, went to Carlsbad, New Mexico, where Mr. Meeker had been hired to provide live entertainment at Desert Fiesta. Jim Gartner went also as musical director. They had a cast of many in that review close to Carlsbad Caverns. Bonnie Hathaway, one of the personal managers and chaperones for the Miss Teenage America pageant, came to Sandusky to be the manager of the live show department at Cedar Point. Mr. Meeker had assigned me as the company manager for the alternate Centennial show and instructed all of us to adhere to consistency and performance. At the beginning of the season, he emphasized that no changes were to be made to the shows, since he was credited as the one who had written and staged the review. On the last performance of the season, unknown to us, Mr. Meeker was in attendance, and some of the cast members deliberately changed some of the material in the review as a gag. I was mortified, and was very sure that Mr. Meeker would never hire me back again. I wrote a note of apology to him, and said that perhaps I was not qualified to be a company manager. He wrote back and said that he did not agree with me, and that I had dealt too harshly with myself. At the end of the 1970 season, Bob Westbrook declined the position as music director. I was hired to play for auditions for Cedar Point in the spring of 1971, touring 5 states and 13 cities with Mr. Meeker, Judy Houghton, the choreographer, and Mac Martin, the manager of the live show department. During the winter and spring of that year, I practiced sight reading from a fake book that I had purchased from Bob Westbrook. I practiced and developed different musical styles of playing until I hit upon what I thought sounded like a professional, popular playing style. I wanted to show Mr. Meeker that I had improved in my playing style. Jim Gertner was hired as the music director that year and helped write the shows. He was assigned the Centennial Theater with America Sings. I was assigned to the Golden Palace as the piano player with a barbershop quartet and a female singer named Anita Green. Anita had jet black curly hair with sparkling green eyes. She reminded me of Renee back in 3rd grade. Anita was from Detroit, and she sang like Barbra Streisand. We had a great show with the quartet. The showstopper was Bill Bailey, belted out by Anita and the boys. We got standing ovations at every performance. That summer I had a crush on Anita, but she had a boyfriend from Detroit, an African American who came one night, and I was disappointed and never pursued her after that. She was my love at a distance, never consummated, just fantasized about. We also had an alternate show at the Golden Palace that summer that was equally good. The piano player for that show was Bob Goodwin, who had worked in the Desert Fiesta show in Carlsbad. All 3 shows were so successful that Mr. Meeker hired all of us to come to San Francisco in the fall for the Dr. Pepper Bottlers meeting and be the entertainment for their industrial show where they showed the latest TV ads. I had the first opportunity to conduct a full orchestra. I had orchestrated the piano part of the barbershop show, and during rehearsals experienced my first earthquake. The chandeliers moved and the floor shook a little. All of the musicians in the orchestra said, "Oh, that was normal," and after a while you didn't even notice it. They just laughed at my reaction. We performed to standing ovations during the 5-day event. The following fall, I took a position at South Lyon First United Methodist as choir director. South Lyon is a small town west of Detroit and east of Ann Arbor. The choir had about 20-25 members, and they sang at one service on Sunday with a Thursday rehearsal. Here I was able to put into practice what I was learning at school and get paid for it. In the spring, I once again accompanied Mr. Meeker and Judy Houghton on the audition tour for Cedar Point. Mr. Meeker asked me if I was interested in being the musical director of the live show department. Jim Gertner accepted the post of manager of the live show department, and Mac Martin returned to Dallas to help Mr. Meeker. I accepted his offer and was assigned the America Sings show at the Centennial Theater. For the next 3 years, I worked as the musical director for the live show department at Cedar Point during the summers, and as choir director of South Lyon First United Methodist during the rest of the year. I kept taking courses at the University of Michigan during that time, but sad to say, never graduated with a degree. I did learn one very valuable lesson, though, from a master's class I had to take. Every piano major was required to attend a public concert of a visiting piano performer, followed by the master's class where all of the piano major students had an opportunity to ask questions from the performer. This particular performer was very well known as a concert virtuoso on the piano. When he appeared on the stage in Hill Auditorium, there was thunderous applause. The maestro acknowledged the applause very slowly, turned to both sides of the hall as well as the balcony, and slowly made his way to the piano bench. He sat down and adjusted the height of the bench with the circular knobs on both sides of the bench. He next proceeded to massage his fingers in a slow and methodical manner while staring off into the ceiling. He then took out his handkerchief from inside his coat pocket and wiped the keys of the 9-foot Steinway. He then put the handkerchief away and slowly brought his hands into the air above his head, and while staring at the ceiling as if in prayer, he slowly brought both hands down toward the keyboard and finally began to play. I was mesmerized. Some of the other students had brought copies of the music he was playing because we knew in advance what he was going to play. I just brought myself so that I could concentrate on watching the maestro perform. As he worked his magic with the audience, I noticed my classmates taking notes throughout the performance. I could not understand the purpose of that, except that I was told we were going to have a discussion with the maestro at the conclusion of the performance. After his final note, the audience roared into thunderous applause and shouts of bravo with a standing ovation that lasted a long time. When the general public had left, we were all invited to the stage to ask questions from the maestro. One young man asked, "Maestro, I noticed that on page 5, bar 75 in the Beethoven Sonata, you played an F sharp instead of an F natural." "I did?" said the maestro. "Sorry about that. I'll try to do better next time." This went on with student after every student asking questions about his mistakes and differences in interpretation. I was becoming very embarrassed by it all, especially seeing that the maestro showed no sign of animosity toward the intimidating questions. Finally, one young man asked him, "Maestro, we could not help but notice at the beginning of the concert you took exceptionally long in preparing for the first note of music. We saw how you acknowledged the applause with special care in a methodical manner. You massaged your hands. You wiped the keys with your handkerchief. Is all of that a necessary ritual that we should aspire to? Is it proper to be so arrogant as to tease the audience and make them wait for your performance? Is that what we should learn to do as concert pianists?" To which the maestro replied with a smile and a twinkle in his eye, "No, I only go through that ritual to wait for my knees to stop shaking." In that instant, I learned the lesson of humility. Here was clearly a man of great talent and reputation. He knew the wisdom of the saying that says, "To whom much is given, much is expected." He knew that he would be drilled by young pianists after the performance. He knew that the audience expected perfection from this seasoned performer. He had to calm his nerves to prepare, and so not with arrogance, but with humility, he taught me to never get too proud about my talents, but sustain a healthy sense of humility and respect for the listeners. I walked up to the maestro, and as he shook my hands with a firm grip, I looked into his eyes and said, "Thank you for the valuable lesson and exquisite performance." On that day, I rejoiced that I had the rare honor and privilege of shaking hands with one of the 20th century's most prolific concert pianists, Arthur Rubinstein. In the spring of 1973, I produced and directed Jesus Christ Superstar at South Lyon First Methodist. We had a cast of 25 with 5 performances during Holy Week. The church was filled to capacity each night. This was the first ever staging of this rock musical. The New York production was in the works and would be opening later that year. Mr. Meeker also called me during that time and asked if I could come down to Arlington, Texas, and help him put together some pre-recorded music for some shows he was producing at Seven Seas. This park was directly across the interstate from Six Flags Over Texas in Arlington, Texas. I flew down for 5 days and helped put together the pre-recorded music for 4 shows at the park. During the summer of 1973, Mr. Meeker offered me a possible position as manager of the live show department at a new venue, a new amusement park contract that was pending for him. If the contract came through, I would be going to Hershey, Pennsylvania, where Mr. Meeker would produce shows for their park. At the same time, Mr. Meeker was offering to some of us at Cedar Point the option of moving to Fort Worth, Texas permanently to work in a dinner theater called Charlie's Place that he, Judy, Mac, and Jim were putting together. The 4 of them would be general partners, and the rest of us would be limited partners. We would all sign a 1-year agreement with first option to renew each year after that. As luck would have it for me, the Hershey deal fell through for Mr. Meeker, and in the fall of 1973, I sold my Opel to my brother Paul for $1, rented a U-Haul truck, and packed my belongings. At the tender age of 25, I moved away from Michigan to new adventures in Texas. I had spent 5 years from the death of my father in honing my craft and improving my competency in musicianship. Thanks to Mr. Meeker, I felt like an adult embarking on my life's work, and I looked forward to new experiences in Texas, my new home and workplace. I was brimming with excitement and anticipation for what lay ahead. If you liked this episode, click like and add your comments. Better still, why don't you subscribe if you haven't already so that you may receive email notifications of future episodes. Also, check out our other worlds at Seven World Productions: the world of art, the world of faith, the world of family, the world of food, the world of games, and the world of music. Go and be inspired.